45 years, and he asked me, why are there no restaurants on the moon? Anybody know? No atmosphere. Boo. Jerry got booed. Our first presenter of the morning is Kim, a longtime friend of mine from Tulsa Avionics. I know it says Porter Strait, but Jerry didn't feel comfortable in the outside environment. He's getting up in age like the rest of us, and which is a good thing, I guess. Birthdays are better than what's in second place. And he chose to bail on us, but Kim is his next door neighbor and from Tulsa Avionics. Kim did all the avionics in the Speedstar for Oscar Taylor. And a little story that I hope it doesn't embarrass Kim, but I thought it was sad but cute. Oscar's out one day at the hangar, and Kim's there watching, talking to him, and they're pressurizing a main landing gear strut. And Oscar called me and says, how much pressure does it take to move this main landing gear strut? And I said, oh, probably 1,000 pounds. And he cranked it up to 1,000 pounds. Then it didn't move, and he cranked it up to 1,500 pounds. When it hit close to 2,000 pounds, the back end came out of the main landing gear actuator, shot across the room, made a dent in the wall, coated Kim in his white shirt with hydraulic fluid. All Oscar could say is, yeah, I wouldn't stand there next time. Kim, you want to come up and talk to us? He's got his white shirt on today. We will not coat him in hydraulic fluid. It's not a danger zone.
Good morning. My name is Kim Wiolland. I own Tulsa Avionics, and Porter Strait Instrument Company is, we share the same facility. So it does prove to be a good situation where we can share assets and information and everything back and forth, but we remain two separate repair stations. Originally back in, I think it was 94, I joined Jerry there and we started a radio shop. And then in 2007, I bought the radio shop assets and started my own repair station. I mostly do repair work. I do help with some installations from time to time, but that's not the majority of my work. The majority is still repair, obviously, of the legacy avionics, Bennings, King, Collins, and those sorts of things. We did recently just finish, I helped install a GTN 750 and a 345 transponder and a GPS steering device in a Beech 18. And that worked out pretty well. They had an existing GTN 650 in there. So we tied all that together, and you've got dual control of the transponder through the 750. The only downside to that, if you lose the 750, then a transponder control, because everything feeds through the 750. And then we left the old original control heads in the panel. So we've got some originality there when you look at it, but it worked out pretty nice. Mostly, I still do a lot of Bennings King repair work. There's still quite a bit of that out there, although every year it gets harder and harder to secure certain things. Some of the generic parts, you can still second source, but original King specific stuff, it's either not available, harder to get. I spend a lot of time making phone calls to other shops looking for equipment or components and that kind of thing. So behind the scenes, sometimes you'll spend an hour or two a day chasing parts. And, most of the time that works out pretty well, but there are some places that just buy and sell parts. They've got no concept of what it is. So sometimes you get the wrong concept of what it is. So sometimes you get the wrong part or a used part that was represented as new. So, that makes life a little more difficult. And although we're a smaller operation, there's only about 4 of us there in the facility. It makes it easier for Ken and other people just to walk in. I still think, that personal connection is good, because you basically, with the OEMs and everything nowadays, you lose that. You can't call in and talk to a tech hardly with anybody anymore. And the lifespan of me in avionics, most of the time, you end up proving or disproving an interface out in the field, until the OEM gets all the feedback and works out all the bugs. Just because they say it will work, just because it's an RS-232 bus or a 429 bus, doesn't always make it a workable situation. So sometimes you got to dig deeper into the details to prove that, what you're going to be installing and interfacing will gel together well. If you stick with all one single OEM, chances are pretty good that everything will fly. But when you're mixing older legacy stuff with analog interface adapters and that kind of stuff, you may run into problems. I've been in avionics since the early 90s. I've worked in Cleveland, Ohio, which I'm originally from Ohio, the Akron area. Worked at Cuyahoga County Airport up there. Came out to Tulsa, where I went to Spartan before I went back there and worked in Cleveland. And worked for 3M StormScope back in the days where they were designing and flight testing the WX-1000 StormScope system. Did a lot of work with that, was a field service engineer with them for a year. And came back out to Tulsa, and I've been here ever since. So I do that. I do some engineering, and I also build test equipment for other shops around the country. So I've got multiple purposes in my shop, just not repair, but test equipment has done me pretty well over the years. So that's a little bit about me. Jerry Bush, he started Porter Strait Instruments, so I think in the early 70s. He's been around for a long time, very knowledgeable. And he fights the same scenario I do with the limited repair capabilities on a lot of the legacy instruments, some of the mechanical components, the belts and like the NSD 360 HSIs, that kind of stuff is hard, if not available at all anymore. So shops that still do repair work, it's a battle every year to try to get something done for the customer. So with that said, I think we'll just go into questions. No, I do the Bendix King servos, the Charlie servos. No, Autopilot Central here in Tulsa does most of that work now. I used to do autopilot repairs, but I don't have the test fixtures anymore to do that. And even those, I mean, some of those old servos, when it costs $1,500, $1,700 just for a motor, it becomes quite ridiculous. So unfortunately, that drives people into looking for just new stuff to put in their airplane. And there's not much you can do about that, unfortunately.
Kim is my go-to guy for analog instrumentation, for King radios, size. Jerry Bush does the repair of the mechanical tachometers, the 3-in-1 temperature gauge, things of this nature, refurbishes them. That's what Porter Strait and then Tulsa Avionics does for me. Anyway, does anybody else have a question? Gardner?
Yes, I heard you mention WX1000. I have a WX1000. I've had it for a long time in my 700 feet. It works perfectly and it always has. Shows lightning for 25 to 300, 200 miles. I use it religiously for my checklist. I have my fourth flight checklist in there. I have emergency checklist, engine off checklist. I have everything in there. So now there's a message that pops up on the front of it that says you can't set the time. And it's just an annoying message. It says press any key to continue. So it's been doing that for a year or two. So I still use it, but I wish that message didn't pop up. So I asked my avionics person, what would it take to fix that? And he said, it'll be very expensive. You'll have to take it out and send it off for an overhaul. Is that right?
That may be, it may be the non-volatile battery in there. Off the top of my head, I couldn't confirm that. I'd have to look in the manual, but I seem to think that's the only message that you have?
Yes.
Unable to set date and time. That may be the situation. I'd have to look in the manual and see. There's a couple pages of notes on error messages and that kind of thing that I'd have to go back and double check.
So we'd have to pull it out and send it off?
Yeah, I don't know if that battery is commercially available or not, and I don't know what the support structure is back at L3 for that. I'm sure it's flat rated for some amount of money. Like most places, it doesn't matter whether they change a light bulb or change out a complete circuit board. The price is the same. So sometimes you make out if you get a board replacement versus, changing a switch or a lamp or, an IC, whatever the case may be. But I've got some business cards with me I'll leave on the table here. So if you need to follow up on anything, feel free to give us a call.
Okay, and Ken, what traffic device do I have in my plane?
You have 9900 BX.
Yes.
Ryan's, and that's owned by Avionics.
Okay, and it works perfectly and always has. Still shows traffic on my radar screen. It shows it on my Garmin 530. So it has a message on it that says this device needs to be serviced. So I click that off and then it still works perfectly. But it keeps popping up on my 530, 430. What do I have to do to fix that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not too insightful on that particular traffic system. And I don't know that they've got any direct interface to where you can get into any specific detail. Have you tried contacting them at all about that?
I haven't done anything with that.
Okay.
They're owned now by Avionics, so the repair station would be in Duncan Aviation in
Lincoln.
Nebraska.
Lincoln, Nebraska.
You don't call, get online and what the procedure is. They typically flat rate to repair those products, and they'll also upgrade the unit so that they can see ADSB.
Oh, okay. Could I see ADSB out of my Sentry, my little portable ADSB?
What is that a question? I'm sorry.
Could they see, would that unit see the traffic out of my portable Sentry that's stuck on the windshield, for my ADSB in?
Sure, that's exactly why we did the update.
So I could call them, maybe make an appointment and fly over there and maybe they could work on it there.
I don't know if they do work on, but I usually when I pull my MFT out of my airplane. I had to buy an MFT. I just boxed up and sent it to them. There's only one box associated with that 9900BX, and it can be pulled out by your avionics shop and sent to them.
Now, Ken, is that BX? Do they modify that to a dual band, or is it a UAT, or just a 1090? Do you know?
You know, I don't know. I just know that
Because I wasn't aware that they had an upgrade for that.
that's what they told me at Oshkosh this year. Because I need to do mine as well. It's a 9900BX as well.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'm seeing is traffic with original transponders. You know, for example, I have a 327 transponder, Garmin 327 transponder, and I use a tail beacon for my ADSB, and I fly below 18,000 feet. And I can see my airplane because on my screen, mainly because I'm still running the Mode C, Mode S, Mode C type transponder. And I do my ADSB through the tail beacon. I know it's kind of confusing, but many of you have upgraded to an ADSB transponder with 345 or 335, and those I can't see on my 9900BX, but I can see them on my Stratus, which is basically ADSB link.
Okay, and that's my next question. My transponder is a KT79, so it's an inch and a quarter tall. I don't have room. I'd like to put a ADSB transponder in my plane and not always have to use the little portable unit and the tail beacon, which only goes up to 18,000 feet, like you say. So does anybody make a transponder that's a quarter of an inch tall? It seems like they're all an inch and three quarters tall, and I do not have room.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not aware of anybody that has a height to match the 79. If you're in lack of real estate, then you're going to have to go, with something behind the scenes, remote mounted unit. What type of display did you say you had? You have an MFD or something in there?
No, I have an EMFD. I have a Jerry. You're basic. Oh, you got a 530 and a 430.
530, 430, and then I have that Avionics radar unit above.
Just above his transponder says it's KFC 150 autopilot.
Yes, and then above that is the how to set your rate of climb and your level off altitude pre-select, and then beside it, which is a very small unit, and then beside that is the distance to the VOR1, VOR2, which I haven't used in 15 or 20 years. So can that unit be taken out of my plane and discarded?
Most likely. If you've got a 530, 430, then the common sense thing would be to go to, remote mount Garmin transponder when you get to the point of pulling that 79 out.
So they make a remote mount transponder?
Yeah, the 345 has a remote version, the 335. So you can look at either one of those. The 345 is the higher end unit that's dual band. It will operate on 978 megahertz and 1090. So basically you got everything covered with an in and out solution. And then the rebroadcast information, even from ATC, you'll get a complete view of traffic, which is a pretty nice.
Okay, thank you.
The scenario being described has the 530, 430 looking, mentioned a remote mounted unit for the transponder. Since it only feeds through the 750, how would you provide the control for 530, 430 stack?
Most of that's done through 429 or 232 control. And if you've got, older units, you're going to have to upgrade the software and everything in those units to make it compatible. With a 750 interface, they've went to a high-speed data bus, but they still maintain control of the remote transponder using the 750 through our RS-232. And in the Beach 18 that I described earlier, the existing 650 that was in there, we had to upgrade the software in it because it wouldn't communicate through the 750. So you had just red X on the transponder display on the 650 screen. So, I mean, with most all this stuff nowadays, you know, the default is, you know, you got to update the software, you know. Sometimes that provides a solution, sometimes it doesn't. You know, I do some work at OSU, their flight school, and they've got a couple 172s that intermittently the MFD in the G1000 package they've got in those airplanes just comes up and says data loading occasionally. And we've swapped boxes around, you know, opened up connectors and looked at those to make sure all the pin security was good, updated software to the latest system version and all that, and they've still got some issues. So those kind of chronic problems just annoy the heck out of you.
I guess why I was asking the question, there's a lot of people with 530, 430 stack or something like that they can still control a remote mounted transponder from the 530. You know, I used to have a 530, 430 stack, and I have a 335X still transponder. That was in the older airplane, and then I got an airfryer, upgraded that one, and I spent the cash on the spent it in GTXI or XI equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for those that have the 530, 430, being able to use that remote mount panel, you know, via the 530 sounds really nice instead of having copper going to the new Garmin GTNs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, the next part of the leading question was that if there was a control head for that remote, if you didn't want to run it through the 750, because that's a single point of failure.
Exactly. And that, you know, that is a downfall. You know, when you've got, you know, the reliability on that stuff's pretty good, but when it dies, you know, you lose half your panel. So, the situation of, you know, dual nav comms and all that stuff proved good years ago. It just gets more complicated nowadays. So those kind of things normally you don't think about a lot because you're saying, boy, this really looks neat. Look at everything it does and all that stuff. So the what if scenarios don't always present themselves until you're in that situation.
Something to think about, you know, what is your contingency plan if you have one of those that 750?
Yeah.
George?
Just to add to the Ryan TK box, some of those boxes are compatible with the Garmin 345 and some of those boxes are not. And the manufacturer will tell you which box is and which isn't. When I did my upgrade last year, I would buy a higher specification Ryan TK box for $300 used, and it allowed it to interface with the 345. My question is, with cabin vertical speed indicator, mechanical gauge, if you were to hit the, to depressurize the cabin quickly, you would end up with a very high rate of ascent in the cabin. Would that damage the cabin vertical speed indicator?
You know, unless it was so sudden, and you would certainly feel it if that was the case. You know, there are mechanical stops in those instruments. Most of the time, they're okay. I've seen a lot more airspeeds damaged over the years than I have vertical speeds, and that's due to, you know, just sometimes in regular maintenance where they just overpressurize the gauge or whatever, or Learjet's had a chronic problem you know, if you didn't maintain airspeed on that when you were doing all your 411, 413 checks, you could run that point backwards over the stop. But normally a VSI, it's a pretty sturdy instrument, so I wouldn't think that that would happen.
My needle is pegged at the max, and it won't move.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So did you experience a depressurization? Is it-
Yes, yeah, I lost electrical power and then having depressurized.
Well, you know, Jerry can take a look at that instrument for you and evaluate it and tell you whether it's worth fixing or just replacing.
Any more questions? Thomas?
Yeah, just back to the Ryan thing, I have the same active interrogation system. Is that better? Okay. I have the same, I think the same, and I don't understand why wouldn't an active interrogating TPAT system see a modern transponder? Because don't they still work on the same frequency that they used to? They just also do ADSB.
Well, if it's does it see the legacy transponders?
I was asking just in reference to, because on mine, the only thing that changed, so what I did with mine is I had a 330 and a 327, kind of like yours. I converted the 330 to a 330ES. And then my TCAT system, I didn't change at all. The only thing that I've noticed is that now, and I don't think it has anything to do with my airplane actually, but when I see traffic, if it's a TCAT traffic that is coming in that they have ADSB, then I see a tail number. I don't just see a target. But frequently I'll just see a target without a tail number, and I'm associated with airplanes that haven't converted, but I'm not sure. Maybe I do need to do this update we're talking about too.
It could be mode C versus mode S. Mode S being transponder with, it's got the number capability of transmission.
Okay.
Well, in the 330ES, even though it's an extended squitter and has Mode S capability and will provide some of that information, it's not a dual band unit. So the UAT operators out there, you won't see those unless they're rebroadcast from ATC.
Even if the Orion system is an active interrogating system, wouldn't that still ping their transponder?
I would think so.
Okay. I didn't think that, I thought all the new transponders still work just like the old transponders, yet more.
Well, they do. I mean, you know, the new 345, 335, all the new stuff still operates at 1090. I mean, that has changed. Some of them will operate on both 1090 and 978, which is the UAT, and their Mode S. So they've got all that capability built in.
Possibly
I'll do it, updating my NVX. It's an Avionics owns Ryan TCAN now, and it has for a number of years. They call it the 600 DX or something like that. It's got a new product. Anybody else have anything for Ken? Ken is my go-to guy when it's component time. He's one of the few technicians. David?
There's a lot of silver crown that things delivered. Sure. But what's the status on?
So when you lose tension, sometimes you get intermittent. Sometimes if you change the frequency real quick, you'll see the couple of the segments. So if it's not a piece of oxidation and everything across the contact on the display where you can pull it out and clean it, then you got to replace that socket. If it's the display itself, then you've got to upgrade to either an LCD or an LED display kit, which, you know, is not cheap. I mean, for the 155, 165 series, I mean, the parts are $840. So, and there's quite a bit of labor. There's about 6 hours of labor in there to do that, because you've got to pull a bunch of components off the display board and the main board, and then you add a little circuit board on the main board, the interface to the new display board and that kind of thing. So, you know, $1,300 is expensive, but, you know, 70% of that is the parts cost. And I've done multiple of those, and even charging $1,300 to where it's acceptable to the customer, I still end up eating a couple hours. You know, it's just a labor intensive deal. So that's about your only solution there, unfortunately.
Anybody have another question? Any other questions? Kim, thank you so much. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
you bet. I'll just leave.